So when do you replace your Toyota and Lexus ball joints? But the better question is, what are ball joints and how do you check them? When do you replace them? What are the common things with ball joints? In today's video, we're going to share with you everything you need to know about Toyota and Lexus ball joints right after this. So what is a ball joint? As the name suggests, it is a joint that has basically a stick with a ball that is contained within a socket. And the purpose of that is it's a suspension component that allows two suspension components to turn on each other or flex out and in, up and down, something like that. So the reason we use them is you're going to see them heavily used in the front, sometimes in the back, but in the front they're used because you're trying to kind of articulate the suspension up and down, and the wheel will also turn. When they're used in the back, the suspension articulates up and down, so you want some connection points from fixed components to moving components that articulate up and down. Usually the ball joint, because it has that socket that ball that sits in the socket, you will have some grease to help it lubricate it, to help reduce that metal-to-metal contact wear. So usually that grease sits in the joint, and then you have a rubber boot that contains that grease within it. So in Toyota and Lexus vehicles, we're going to have multiple types of ball joints. You will have, in most front-wheel drive configured car or some all-wheel drive, you will have a ball joint that sits at the bottom, a lower ball joint that is separate. It's not part of a control arm. It is a separate component that you can replace. And then in the trucks, in Toyota trucks, you're going to have multiple configurations. In the older trucks, you're going to have the upper ball joints potentially replaceable separate. That ball joint will be pressed in the knuckle, and then the control arm attaches to it. That is a separate replaceable ball joint. But then later models will have the ball joint inverted, so the stick comes down and the ball is up. That is actually part of the control arm. They are not replaceable separate. The lower control arm configurations, you have either a separate ball joint that is bolt mounted to the control arm, or you're going to have the ball joint be part of the control arm and it's not replaced separate. Now you will have some different configurations. Very few front-wheel drive configurations will have ball joint that is part of the control arm. That if the ball joint fails for whatever reason, you have to replace the entire control arm because they're not serviceable separate, they're not sold separate. And then in specific cases, in some rear-wheel drive configured sedans like the LS460 rear-wheel drive, you will have a ball joint that is part of the knuckle. It's not replaceable separate. That is kind of the odd configurations out there, but most of them you're either going to have replaceable separate or part of a control arm. So when do you replace ball joints on your vehicle? This is a very debated subject, and there's a lot of conflicting information out there. So let me put my humble 2 cents in this. The only reason you replace a ball joint is it has play or it's making noise. That is the only 2 reasons you should immediately replace ball joints or very soon replace ball joints. I see and hear a lot of mechanics saying, oh, the ball joint is leaking, you need to replace it. I'm sorry, did we leave the drain plug loose on that ball joint? No. When you see wetness around the ball joint, all that means is the grease that we talked about that is inside to lubricate it, some of it started coming out. Whether the rubber boot is old and it's letting some of that grease out, or it has a rip in it or whatnot, that's when I would start watching this ball joint, testing it regularly, meaning it's not going to fail until all the grease runs out, and then we have metal-metal contact for a while. Well, what's that while? Years? Usually years. So are we going to just frantically replace it and spend all this money? We could have driven on that same ball joint safely for years. And the second thing is noise. Noise usually happens, is the number one sign of that joint wearing out and starting to cause all kinds of noise. And usually the noise is squeaking, either when the suspension articulates, you go over kind of a dip in the road as the suspension articulates up and down, it'll start squeaking, or if it's the front ones, when you turn, you're gonna hear them squeaking a lot. That is the first sign that they are about to fail. And the second thing, of course, if they have play. These are the only reasons, we're going to circle back to the beginning, these are the only 2 reasons you want to replace a ball joint, not because it has a little bit of wet spot around it or a leaking. There's nothing to leak, just a little bit of grease that they have. Now, two things I want you to not do. When a ball joint gets old and it's worn down, it's making squeaking noise or it has play, don't force grease in it and say it's good, because it's gonna hold, but the damage is already done. Don't risk it, because ball joints can be a safety concern. And the last thing I want to talk about here is play. See, some folks will hold a ball joint and move it side to side, in and out like this, and say, oh, this has all kinds of play. And that's actually not a measure. So when you compare it to a new one, look how the new one is hard to move. Folks, that new one, when you put it on the car and you give it a couple months of driving, it'll be like that as well. That's the reality. But what we're looking for is in and out play is what's a bad play, meaning the socket and the ball inside of it, they have kind of, the socket has expanded or the ball has worn down and got smaller, because the smaller that ball gets or the bigger the socket gets, meaning it could detach and come out, and that's what the safety concern is. So when you have play like that, replace it, and as soon as possible, because that's when they're about to go. So how do you check your ball joints? Ball joints, so something interesting about them, they are loaded. When you lift the car up and the suspension falls down, they are under load. So sometimes you're not going to be able to just simply move the wheel and feel any play. Sometimes you will when it's a severe case in certain configurations, but sometimes you won't. The best way to check ball joints is lift the wheel up, not super high off the ground, put a pry bar underneath it, and push the wheel up. If it has any play, you're going to feel it immediately. You can put your hand on the ball joint if you have like two ball joints, upper and lower. Do that while you're holding each ball joint. You can have a second person help you. That's the best way to check them. But really, the 100% way to check them, which is unrealistic, but that's a way, is take them out of the car and test them, because now they're not loaded, or at least don't take them completely out of the car, detach them from their mounting point where they do no longer have pull or push force, then check them for in and out play. If they have anything, replace them. That's the best way. Let's talk about some common mistakes and things you should never do when it comes to ball joints. Never, ever buy an aftermarket ball joint for your Toyota. This is a common mistake, and it's a very bad one. Toyota ball joints, first, the individual replaceable one, they're not expensive, and they are super high quality. I mean, till today, they are really good. They are really worth every penny and worth the wait to get them and order them and whatnot versus the readily available aftermarket one. That's the first thing. Second thing is, don't replace a ball joint because it has a leak. There's no such thing. Does it have play? Does it make noise? No. Then keep going on it, but keep an eye on it. You're going to hear it before it fails. You're going to hear it, and your annual inspection needs to include checking ball joints as the car gets older. The next thing is, don't replace a ball joint that is part of a control arm that is not serviceable separate. Folks, I see this mistake all the time, and at that point, you are experimenting on your own. And whatever money you will save, you are potentially causing a very dangerous situation for your car, yourself, your family, and other families around you that are sharing the road with you. Don't do that. Fix the car right. That's all I'll say. And the last thing here is, when it comes to, let's say you're replacing control arms on a front-wheel drive car, I'm seeing a lot of aftermarket control arms will come with a ball joint. If you want to save money on the control arm, don't advise it, but it's up to you, I get it. When you get a control arm that comes with a ball joint, don't replace your ball joint if there's nothing wrong with it. Toyota trucks will normally wear their ball joints more than front-wheel drive cars. That's the way it's always been. If you have a truck that is 15 years old, it has 300,000 miles, 400,000 miles, you're going to really want to be checking them ball joints, because that's usually the time where they start having play. They have a reputation of breaking. So when it comes to Toyota trucks, when they get older and they have miles on them, I will be a little bit more frequent on checking them. Don't just ignore them. Oh, I hear no noise, the truck doesn't make. One thing about Toyota trucks, their ball joints don't start having a little bit of play and then they go. They have a tendency of just going with minimal play the day before, and then all of a sudden they broke off. especially when they get old and they have mileage. So always check them. That is very important. And when you have one ball joint that have play, always replace them in pairs. This is one advice I'll give you, because it'll create a very interesting driving dynamic when you have one new ball joint and one in-service ball joint. Always replace them as a pair for that side. And one important note, something you should never discard or not think about. If the car gets in an accident or you hit a wheel on a curb, for example, you gotta be checking the ball joints at the time of the accident and then 6 months later, because I've seen so many ball joints fail. Actually, that's the number one reason they fail early, is hits on the wheel. You hit a curb, you got in an accident that hit the wheel back and possibly destroyed the control arm or strut, and the ball joint, oh, it doesn't have play, it's fine. Give it a few months, it'll have play. Be careful with that. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.